everybody. Welcome to the second video episode of OK Talks. I'm your host, Oliver Kendall. I'm a lifelong political nerd with a background in international relations and security policy who's worked both in domestic US politics and had the good fortune to spend quite a bit of time and live in a number of countries besides my own, which puts me in a good position to, as I try to do on this show, both interpret what's happening in American politics for my international audience and shed some light for the folks back home on events of note going on in the rest of the world. So, not being a lawyer and never having been like the kind of person who likes to watch Judge Judy, I've largely steered clear of talking about the minutia of Trump's trials on OK Talks, but now that we have an actual verdict in one, well, it seems worth talking about. So, okay, there we go. Guilty on all 34 counts in the trial in Manhattan of Trump's having interfered illegally in the 2016 election by paying hush money to cover up embarrassing information in what was effectively an illegal campaign contribution and a cover up of that illegal campaign contribution, if I'm understanding the legal aspects of it correctly. America's justice system may be operating infuriatingly slowly when it comes to Donald Trump, but we got there. This is definitely a milestone in the saga of Trump's seemingly endless legal issues. One down, three to go. I'm speaking pretty casually here, but this is rather a big deal. Never before has an American president been convicted of a felony. We came the closest back in the 70s, but Ford pardoned Nixon before it ever got to this point. So this is kind of huge. Of course, it does also raise a whole bunch of necessary follow-up points. And before I get into those, I do want to just take a second to ask anyone who hasn't done so already to please be sure to follow the show so as not to miss the next episode. And of course, if you really want to do me a solid, please do hit like, leave a comment, and most importantly, share the show with anybody you think might get something out of it. Thanks as always to anyone who already has, and thanks in advance to anyone else who will. So, as I was saying, this guilty verdict does raise a whole bunch of necessary points to open here, like what this will mean for the election. And that I don't know. I will say, having been glued to Twitter since the result came out, one thing I have noticed, a whole bunch of very serious people on the political right are trying very hard to basically manifest the idea that Trump being convicted of a bunch of criminal charges is totally going to swing the election in his favor because so many Americans will be so outraged that an obvious criminal was unanimously convicted on all counts by a jury of his peers. Maybe they're right. I don't know. But to me, I will say, their tone feels a little bit like someone saying, I'm glad the cute girl I asked to prom said no. I didn't want to go anyway, stupid dance. Maybe I'm wrong. But it does read as trying rather hard. And it is interesting to see, I will say, the former Law and Order Party continue its relentless march away from the values that it's always claimed to care about. But, although I will certainly giggle at the Republicans' sad attempts to spin this as an electoral advantage for Trump, I'm not convinced enough that they're wrong to not be made kind of nervous by how many people I'm seeing on the left that are right now treating this, I don't know, like the other team's star NFL quarterback got suspended and is now being replaced by a high school freshman or something. Okay, there have been polls that have shown that a certain number of people wouldn't vote for Trump if he were in fact convicted of a felony. But on the other hand, him being indicted in various jurisdictions basically won him the Republican primary. It kind of saved him. Maybe this does end up having the same effect. Maybe I didn't even want to go to prom people actually have a point. Another possible outcome is that the nature of this particular trial, having been the one that came first, maybe blunts the effect of that I won't vote for him if he's actually convicted thing. We have to be realistic. A poll usually is an exercise in which a pollster in some way talks to a potential voter. It is a social experience, a social exercise of sorts. And the person being polled doesn't necessarily just check their sense of propriety or shame or whatever at the door the minute the person they're talking to, comes to talk to them. People lie to pollsters sometimes. I wouldn't be shocked if a number of people, when asked, would you really vote for a guy who was straight up convicted of a crime, said no, but might still end up doing so at the end of the day if the right permission structure were created. And this particular trial, unfortunately, gives some opportunities for some folks who might have once said, I won't vote for him if he's convicted, but now want to wiggle out of that previously held, well, conviction, one might say, to go ahead and do that. And for one thing, this case was brought in an overwhelmingly Democratic jurisdiction by a prosecutor who is himself a partisan Democrat. Now, that is okay. That is part of our legal system. I, Oliver, do not want to say that to, or like, I don't say that to in any way like, cast aspersions on this trial. It was completely legitimate. But putting myself in the shoes of somebody who like really, really doesn't like Democrats and is trying to find an excuse to vote for the Republican nominee despite him now being a convicted criminal, I could see that being a way of convincing myself that this conviction, this particular conviction, it's not that big of a deal. And that, by the way, that like permission structure is helped by the fact that something like half of all Republicans in Congress have spent the last couple of weeks trekking up to Manhattan to repeat that talking point outside the courtroom. That is, after they awkwardly repeat Trump's plaintive whining that it's so cold in there. Another potential permission structure for voters to ignore this could be the like both how long ago this set of crimes happened and also the like tawdriness of this particular case. I mean, like the fact that part of the crimes that Trump committed here revolved around paying off a porn star to not tell anyone that they banged while wife number three was at home taking care of the newborn. Well, like that just feels on some level kind of like fundamentally unserious. Like the soundtrack to that movie, it sounds a lot more like the soundtrack to like Pink Panther or Benny Hill than it does House of Cards, if you see what I mean. Okay, maybe that reference only worked for my fellow soundtrack nerds, but I think the rest of you understand the point that I'm trying to make here. Like there was something sexual involved, and we're pretty immature about sex in America. Furthermore, like it just feels like sleazy, like scummy behavior. Everybody already kind of expects that from Donald Trump. Like it's baked in. It's old information that he's a cad, as they used to say. Like I could see all of that helping some people who might have been hesitant to vote for a literal convict to maybe get over that hesitation. Like this wasn't that big a deal. This we already knew he was a scumbag, and I was going to vote for him when I knew that. This does nothing to change that. So I am worried about this creating that sort of permission structure. And of course, the reality is that this case on its own represents one of the more illegal things that any president has ever done in the history of the United States. Like this was a fairly serious campaign finance violation and a criminal cover-up. Like it should probably have been prosecuted at the federal level. Further evidence of the fact that Merrick Garland is a wimp and should never have been made attorney general. More on that in other episodes of OK Talks, and possibly more on that later in this one. Like, this should be a big deal. It would be a big deal for most other politicians. Trump just has almost like some sort of like PR immunity by reason of documented history of sleaze and legal issues. Also, the severity of Trump's crimes here is eclipsed by the fact that he has in fact been charged in 3 other separate indictments with crimes that are way more serious. Like, really, no porn stars in any of them. And the fact that this trial is almost certainly to be going to be the only one that the American people get to see a verdict in before being asked whether or not we should send the guilty party back to the Oval Office is just a profound indictment of our legal system. I've done other episodes of OK Talks decrying the snail pace with which our justice system has moved vis-a-vis Donald Trump since he left the White House. So I'm going to not go into a ton of details here, but just a few things worth noting on that point. The Washington Post reported a while ago that the FBI and Merrick Garland's Justice Department waited more than a year after the events of January 6th to launch any sort of a formal investigation into Trump's less violent than just J6 efforts to overthrow the 2020 election. A year. I mean, are you fucking kidding me? According to that report in the Washington Post that I just mentioned, a year after the events of January 6th, the totality of Justice Department resources directed at that crime consisted of 4 prosecutors and a few investigators from the National Archives and the Postal Service. So that is to say, basically a year after an unprecedented attempt to overthrow an American election, which culminated in a violent attack on the Capitol, the temple of our democracy, the totality of DOJ resources directed at the ringleaders, as opposed to just the poor schmucks smearing shit on the walls of the Capitol as part of the riot. The totality of those DOJ resources directed at the ringleaders a year later was basically 4 lawyers, a couple of librarians, and Ed Helms' character from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Like, the weird thing is that once Merrick Garland did finally get around to appointing special counsel Jack Smith to look into this, after having basically punted the ball to Congress up until that point, well, it only took Jack Smith 9 months to bring charges in both the January 6th case and the other case about how Donald Trump apparently squirreled away a bunch of highly classified documents to either use as scratch paper or as some sort of, light bathroom reading down at his golf club in Florida. Of course, then poor Jack Smith, and also poor the millions of Americans who would really like to see some verdicts before we have to fucking vote, drew the short straw in the Florida case and got saddled with a judge down there who is effectively the general secretary of the Palm Beach County Donald Trump fan club and keeps holding up, or rather keeps helping Trump delay this case until he'll have been dead for 5 years. Now, just for contrast, Trump's Brazilian analog, Jair Bolsonaro, tried to pull his own January 6th style coup after failing to win re-election in the last couple of years, and the Brazilian justice system had him in legal proceedings very quickly. Within, I think, less than a year of his being removed from office, he was barred from seeking office again for at least a decade, and he's in a whole bunch of other legal hot water. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, with the help of America's apparently narcoleptic attorney general, managed to avoid prosecution long enough to run for president again and thus be able to attack investigations into him as election interference, use them to fleece donors into basically paying his legal bills, and push back most of the trials of him until after the election, at which point he'll be president again and can thus just, avoid prosecution. With all that stated, though, here we are. Donald Trump has finally been convicted of a felony. This is, as I said at the top, a big deal. President Biden might have said a number of years ago, a big fucking deal. But it does, also raise some more questions than it answers. I mean, everyone, kind of knew Donald Trump was guilty of this. I mean, I've already discussed up until now some of the political questions that it raises, but this conviction also raises other basic but important questions that I'm in less good of a position to speculate on, but I'll try. For example, what will Trump's sentence be? And given that Trump will certainly appeal his conviction, is there any chance that we will actually get to know that before the election? Will it include prison time? Will he get to basically sit at home with an ankle bracelet, watch Fox, and throw bowls of ketchup at the wall? Or will he actually, get sent to Rikers? And if so, what does that look like? What does the Secret Service do? I mean, former presidents in America get Secret Service protection for life. Do they go to Rikers with him and be his cellmate? I kind of want to make a who will be whose bitch joke here, but maybe not. At least we know with a pretty high degree of certainty, I would say, which prison gang Trump would presumably be joining. But in all seriousness, then, if Donald Trump does get sent to prison before the election, does he campaign from there? And then what if he wins? I mean, he can't actually pardon himself on this one because they're state level charges, and I rather doubt that Democratic New York Governor Kathy Hochul is going to be in any mood to pardon him. So presumably his sentence would just be suspended until he leaves office, which would then set up a situation in which a guy that we already know has authoritarian tendencies, who's already tried to violently hold power after losing an election, has yet another incentive to simply refuse to ever leave office once his term is up. That is a scary thought, and one which should serve as just one more reminder that this man cannot, under any circumstances, be allowed anywhere near the White House ever again. That is to say, My message to my friends celebrating this conviction: yes, it is a good thing. Better late than never. But we cannot rest on our laurels here. We cannot take this go directly to jail, do not pass go, do not collect $200 for Trump as a get out of jail card, as a get out of jail free card for ourselves. We still have to beat him this fall badly. So by all means, let's have a drink. Let's celebrate this conviction tonight. But tomorrow, it's back on the horse because this is just not over.